We tend to view China as a juggernaut, one of immeasurable power, internal cohesion, tremendous resources, and determination, where all are in full alignment with the diktats of the Central Committee. But is this entirely the case? Is China really an adversary that can't be beat? To many, China may be considered a paper tiger, so to speak, in some areas. It gives the appearance of unwavering strength, while buried under the surface, deep-seated ethnic and socio-economic tensions persist. There's also dissatisfaction with Beijing's policies, unsustainable economic bubbles, and for many, a longing to be more westernized, more free. Maybe if we properly understood the real fundamentals on the ground in the Forbidden Kingdom, we could better handle China's growing aggression and better handle strategic maneuvers on our end to deal with them. To delve into all this, I'm joined by Weifeng Zhong, a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center. Weifeng, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
What do you feel is the primary area that the U.S. should pursue, let's say, going into 2021 and beyond, to try to rein in Chinese aggression on, let's start with the economic front? What can we do?
I think you raise a question that really should keep us on our toes for at least the next decade, if not the next century. Because I think, in my view, the U.S. policy of romantic engagement with China, ever since China entered the WTO 20 years ago, has turned the two economies to be so intertwined. So there's no really simple answer to any of these national security concerns that's brought by the Chinese regime to the U.S. economy, because the two economies are now so interdependent. And so that's why I spend almost every waking hour of my career trying to decode what's going on in China, because I think the first step towards solving this problem is to first get a better understanding of what's going on in China. And that's what the essence of the policy change index that I developed with the Mercatus Center.
Now, tell me about this. China's economic growth was explosive for many, many years. In some ways, it's probably the defining characteristic of China as a country, at least in the Western media, for about the last 30 years. Explosive growth in China. But if you look, and we have this chart up there, yes, there was the financial crisis 2009. It recovered quite a bit. But since around 2011, 2012, it looks like China's explosive growth has been trending in the other direction. What's going on here?
What's going on here is that this is the great slowdown in terms of economic outcome, in terms of the growth rate of the GDP. But what actually happened many years before that was, ever since 2005, there has already been a slowdown in terms of pro-market reforms. So institutions have already been changing years leading up to what we are now seeing as the economic slowdown in terms of the outcome. And as we have found from the Policy Change Index project, we have detected that the Chinese government, in terms of what they are saying in the public propaganda in China, they were already spinning around, talking points in propaganda that was in line with the slowdown of reform. So they, in some sense, they were giving away their actions in their words beforehand.
Now, we also have other allies in trying to contain at least Chinese aggression and these border disputes, and some of these extraterritorial maneuvers the Chinese government's been engaged in have certainly been getting more attention in recent years. We have not just India, not just with India, but China has border disputes with 18 countries, including Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia. You have the Spratly Islands, right, the Senkaku Islands. They have these different island chains. There's a lot of powers in the region that seem like they have interests that are somewhat at odds with China. Weifeng, tell me, how can we leverage that? How can we use allies in the region, again, not to be unnecessarily aggressive toward China, but to rein in Chinese expansionism and some of its more bellicose tendencies?
I think to answer that question, to understanding where Chinese aggressions might happen next would be hugely important. Now, as you have mentioned, there are so many possible candidates in terms of where the next conflict with China in those border countries might be. And what is interesting is that China had some of these conflicts with those regions in the past. For example, between China and India, something along the line of the border conflict happened in 1960s and again in 1970s. And so now the reason that we are seeing these potential conflicts again in the similar areas would allow us to see whether a similar border war might happen again. And a good way to tell, for example, would be to look at what the Chinese government behave, the way they behave, the stuff they say in the propaganda back in the days in 1960s, that might give us some clue in terms of predicting whether something might happen. And that should be the first step toward answering these military aggression.
Who are our most important and powerful allies in responding to China's aggressive strategies that it's planning out for decades to come?
There are really many candidates in the region, but I do want to highlight the importance of Taiwan, because that has long been an issue between US and China in the bilateral relations. But what has changed in recent years is the fact that China now has become more of a global leader in terms of the manufacturing semiconductor chips for electronic devices in all the computers we use today. And because that has been the semiconductor chips to computers is just like crude oil to the world economy. And the fact that that is sitting right next to mainland China should be a very concerning issue from the perspective of US policymakers.
Weifeng, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.